This is an HR program on demand, a living seed capsule of work life and workplace coming live from a rooftop in Stockholm, Sweden. It's me, Ann-Marie Andrich, and
me, Katarina Berg.
A vodcast, if you like, on HR, straight across the counter. Sponsored by HR The Real Deal, HR by HR for HR. Hello, Gary.
Hi.
Welcome to this very beautiful rooftop in Stockholm.
Very beautiful.
Yeah? Have you been here before?
I have here, yes, but
On
not
the
for
rooftop?
No, on the rooftop. Yeah, not for this. This is the first time.
Exactly. We're very, very excited to have you join us and to help us unravel the mysteries of HR analytics, people insights, whatever we call it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So why don't we start with you introducing yourself?
Sure.
I think you have a very, very interesting background, and obviously curious to learn how you ended up in Stockholm.
Yes, yeah. So it's a role at Spotify. So I look after HR Insights, which is two parts. So we've got HRIS, which is our workday and HR tech teams, and then people analytics. So been here just over 2 years now. So pretty new to HR. So procurement background, worked in lots of different industries, not by design, just by accidents. I've done everything from insurance to oil and gas to media company now. So.
Excellent. And how you said you're pretty new to HR. How was that leap then?
So always a bit of an interest area because I've always done data and analytics. And then I sort of finished up oil and gas and thought I took a kind of year, bit of a break, moved back to Scotland and made a sort of probably first deliberate career move. People analytics was just starting to become a thing, and I thought that feels like it's a good fit for me in terms of skill, interest levels. And then thankfully role came up and jumped at the chance.
And here you are.
And here I am.
Here you are. Excellent. Good. So how was it? You joined Spotify more or less 2 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah. How was it then when you joined? Where was the company? What were you tasked with?
So I'd probably say a bit of I guess crossroads. Probably four. Crossroads sounds like it's too many options. It was one way or the other.
Yeah.
But I think they just recently made the sort of decision to move HRIS and people analytics together. So it was a decision sort of Katarina, my boss, made to bring them together. I think it was, fortunately for me, I don't think there really was any set of this is the direction we're going to go in. It's like, well, let someone come in and see what they can do. So good foundations, I think was probably where it was, but it was very much in its infancy. And that was probably the bit that surprised me as I was joining Spotify,
right.
Cutting edge, this is going to be super easy, just come in and, I wouldn't actually know as much as everybody else here. And it was, so that was a bit of an adjustment when you came in of going, and I joined during the summer. And now I've started to learn the Swedish traditions with summer. So there wasn't actually one here when I first started. So it's quite difficult. It's quite difficult to ask, what should I be doing?
Right.
So I think that was kind of the point where we were at. I think then it was, okay, what do we want it to be? And for me, it was spending time of understanding, what was our strategy, what was our directionally, where we were trying to go as a function, and then where did, I think particularly people analytics, the workday side and HR tech was probably a bit further on. There's more maturity to that. So it was then making that decision around, okay, where do we want to go with this now? And spend some time, the usual things, speaking to people, understanding what the problem areas are, and it's, after you've been doing it for a few years, you start to understand where the issues are going to be.
Right. So understanding the business, getting to know the organization, and that typically is something that you do initially when you start a job, and obviously you did it, right? And then what were the sort of the steps that you took then? Do you have a team today, or how did you go about it?
So I think when I first started, we kind of split half and half in New York, half in Stockholm. I think. So I'd been obviously done some pre-work before I sort of started, before sort of joining. I think there was a bit for me of kind of testing the water of, okay, how radical could we go?
Right.
Like, how big's the ambition?
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of late nights here, just going quite out there, and thought I'll use that as a testing water, and then had a conversation with my boss, and then had a conversation with Katarina, and I was expecting a lot of pushback. This is crazy. Look, we're not here. And it was all very sort of muted. Yeah, sounds great. So, okay.
And why were you expecting pushback?
Because it was just very, very different.
Right.
In terms of, so it's more, there's things about this job and things about these roles which I'm always curious and fascinated with by. So you thought, well, if you get the chance to do them, how would you do them? So it was like, well, I'll tell you what, I'll start extreme and we'll work back.
Right.
So, and it was a kind of very easy yes for the extreme.
Good strategy. So you are at the extreme now.
Yeah, so I think in terms of what we're trying to be, yes,
Yeah.
I would say so.
Okay. If you were to explain to us, what is the extreme? And we will sort of move into the disco that I'm so fascinated about.
So I think it's that. I think it's I think data and analytics quite a traditional field. It's got a very big stereotype with it, the types of outputs you want to do, and it was really changing the narrative around that, around what were we here to do, not being seen as the data people, and of course that's an aspect of the role, but it was kind of positioning ourselves differently.
Right.
And that was, so yes, we're here to do this, but actually we really want to shape something quite different and be a core part of what the function is, and being quite deliberate about that. And I think it's just a style of what we try and do with things, and disco is a kind of product of that, but we've got other things which we've done, which I'm biased obviously, but I don't think many companies are pushing in the avenues that we're trying to do. So there was that pushing up against some of those stereotypes, which is probably why it felt more extreme maybe than actually in reality is, but that certainly at the time that's how it felt.
Right. So let's move into disco.
Yes.
Yeah. I read this blog,
Yes.
and there are several articles on the disco.
Yeah.
Yeah. And rather than me explaining what it is, because obviously you're the expert, so why don't you share with us, what is disco and how did you design that? Because this is something, if I understand correctly, Gary, this is something that you and the team actually have developed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so totally in-house. So no, it was, so it's two parts. So the kind of the boring, not so interesting bit to sort of talk about is, and what's actually at the core system is it's effectively a data warehouse, but the principle behind it was, how could we, if you conceptually thought of this idea of a single line of data for every Spotify, so if we knew from everything from the moment you applied to the moment you decided to leave, if we could build that capability and that understanding, then actually you've got a very, very powerful capability then in terms of what you can then do with that data set. So that's what disco is in its essence. What's come off of that is what's the articles have been about is the kind of front end app that we've built. So that's how does people in the business leaders, HR professionals, how do they access that information? How do they consume that information? And that's certainly where we push the sort of boundaries of what you could do with it. But I guess the sort of genesis of the idea was, I'm fascinated with HR. To me is kind of where marketing was maybe 20 years ago in terms of its use of data. And if you think around how advertising works now and how we do that, I heard somebody said something, if you thought of culture as a product and your employees as your customer base, how do you sell your culture? Mm-hmm. And if you think of that in the product terms, how important data is in that equation, it was kind of, well, how do we build that type of understanding? But what I didn't then want it to be was, the team's not huge in terms of size. So how do you remove the bottlenecks of the data requests?
Right.
So what's headcount, what's the real basics. Yeah. And so what we tried to do with disco was really random search, and it was a quote from Daniel when he'd said that if you considered Spotify as a platform, but it could be expanded to different types of content. Now, he was obviously talking in the context of audio, but I took that at very face value. And actually then if you start to distill down what we do in a product sense, it's how do we connect people with audio that they love? And it's about navigation and how do you find things. And okay, data's maybe not quite as exciting as a podcast or a song, but the challenge is the same. So how do you replicate an experience like that where, I'm under no illusions, people aren't in disco every day. They might be in once a month, they might be in once a quarter, but how do you have an experience whereby you don't have that really high bar of, okay, how do I use this?
Exactly, it has to be user-friendly,
exactly.
Intuitive.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. So we went big on if we could replicate a consumer type experience.
Yes.
I think my favorite description of disco I've had is it's aggressively themed.
Yes.
So Spotify was our inspiration. So how can we take the idea of a song, an album and a playlist and construct that together in a very different way? Mm-hmm. And that's what makes it very, very different. There's lots of boring technical things which I'll go into, which I won't, but that set the whole premise of then what we did with it.
It sounds so super fascinating. And I've seen sort of a snapshot of disco where basically there is a correct me if I'm wrong, there's a picture of me if I were to work at Spotify, and then there's playlists and there are songs, and it actually looks like, I would go into Spotify, right?
Yeah. Same idea.
Yeah. So what would if I were an HRBP, what would my playlist look like?
So the honest answer, it depends.
Yeah.
So what we didn't want to do was, it's this idea of personalization. So, what's priorities for one business might not necessarily be the priorities for other businesses. So Katarina has a playlist, which is more of a holistic view of what we have. So what are our key people metrics, from everything from headcount to diversity related stats. Right. But for some of our business areas, they can be really strong in the diversity stuff and really want to get into level of that. Some people go around talent and progression and movement. So it's actually, what we've tried to do is engage in that conversation. What are your priorities and what are the things you're going to look at, rather than, because there's a lot of content in disco. Yeah. So there's hundreds of songs, hundreds of metrics. Yeah. So what we don't want to do is then just, barrage everything that you kind of have. So it's what's important for you as a business, what you're trying to monitor and track, and then what metrics do we have there that can kind of tell that story in a different way. And I think what makes our playlist different from a dashboard is there's only so many pixels on a screen. There's only so many space for so many widgets. Playlists are far more free form. It's kind of storytelling in a different way of how we can stitch these things together.
Fantastic. I'm curious. So you joined then 2 years ago, more or less 2 years ago. Do you see with Disco and the work that you've been doing now during the past 2 years, has that sort of usage of Disco or the way that you leverage on people analytics changed within the HR function?
So I think it's maturing. It's probably the easiest way to describe it. I think it's taken the function a bit of time and taken us as a bit of a team as well. How do you fit into that? And I think certainly strategically for me, our direction's altered slightly. So usage has definitely increased and got better. I think we've dialed into more around what people want to see and how do they want to use it and how can we respond to that. But I think for me the piece which is changing now is our focus is it's more product. So how do we, rather than reports and analysis, actually how could we build products for the function which support them with what they're trying to do?
Exactly. And what are they trying to do? What is the function trying to do?
Where to begin? I think we need longer.
Miracle workers, right?
I think this last year has changed some of that, right? But I think for us, work from anywhere has been a big piece. I think we're growing at a credible rate, and I think our kind of, it still surprises me now, the amount of people who join Spotify, how quickly we grow every year, so how do you support that transition? How do you support, how do we execute it the right way? How do people, how do we keep up and just get enough people through the door?
Right.
But I think a lot now in sort of, our mental health side of things is a much bigger thing. Our diversity, inclusion, belonging team, that team's been a big focus. So I think for us, it's how do we support those teams with the right information and allow them to spend the time on doing what they should be doing and not worrying about, are these numbers right? Are these numbers wrong? So I think those have been the areas.
And the data that you bring into Disco comes from different sources.
It does,
yeah.
So Workday's our primary system for all kind of people-related information. But we've got our ATS side of things. We've got things around kind of swipe data. So how do we support our GWS in terms of office utilization? We've got things around our L&D side of things, our people engagement surveys. So quite a lot of different elements, but what we try to do is link it in with, key parts of that employee journey. But lots of different formats, which comes with its challenges. But go back to my point before around that single line per Spotify. That's the goal.
Beautiful. So is this something that you're going to sell to the outside world? Because it sounds so fascinating, and I know obviously that many companies and especially HR functions, we are struggling a little bit on, how do we use the data? How do we make it into insights and make it into something that is driving the business forward? And it seems like you've made it so user-friendly and playful, obviously one of your core values at Spotify as well. But is this something that you are going to sort of export?
No plans.
Okay.
No
I'll
plans.
ask Katarina.
She might know more.
Yeah.
No, but I think what we're trying to do with sharing the story around it is I think there are things that we've learned that I think people can pick up on. So I think the consumer focus we had with the product, which made it slightly different, was the one nugget I had from which I'd never ever thought of doing this. All the years I've been doing this was we did some work with the user research teams who work on our main sort of product. And if you're an analytics team and you build a dashboard, a great exercise to do is maybe take 10 stakeholders and ask them just to use your dashboard on a call and watch them use it. And you can't talk.
Right.
And you just have to watch them.
Right.
So you'll ask them a question of how they do things and just watch them. Incredibly frustrating to watch. Like, incredibly frustrating to watch, but it works. You can see where the pain points are. What can't they click? What can't they open? So small things like this, that's what we're trying to share. Some of these little feet, because those are actually the core problems. Like Disco's a product and we've really gone out there and tried to deliver something soon, but the actual principles and core, you can do at a much lower scale and still have a big impact, is the idea. So I think that's what we're trying to share more than necessarily export. Like I say, but have a chat with Katarina.
I will have a chat with Katarina. This is so inspiring, and I know that it's such a need and thirst outside in the HR world for something like this. So very well done. Very inspiring, Gary. Yeah. I think we will need to have a second session to follow up, what were the learnings and, what's cooking in the future.
We have. We've got some big plans for next year. So.
Of course you do. Okay, for next session. Oh, brilliant. Okay, thank you so much for joining. Do you know how we typically end these VODs?
I do.
Do you?
Yes, 3 things.
3 things.
Three
okay.
things. I'm going to get the road now.
You go.
So stay safe,
yes.
Stay strong, stay active.
Excellent.
Yes.
I de medalje. Very good.
Thank you.
Great.
Great.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
It was good.
Good.
It was really good.
Good.
Why is your hair completely still and mine isn't? People are like, I cannot work. It's too hot. My brain doesn't.
Right. Good.
Okay. Okay. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Ready when you are.
Good. And then Simon's like, Anne-Marie, do you see me? And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. It's good.
Okay, can we start?
Yes.
Whenever we want.
They're
I will
all the
probably.
same. They're all the same. Just add hope.
He's a rock star.